Tervetuloa Poliittisen valokuvan festivaalin taiteilijahaastatteluiden pariin. Ja tänään mulla on ilo ja kunnia haastatella Poliittisen valokuvan festivaalin taiteilijaa Demelza Kooijta. Demelzan työ Sudet ylhäältä nähtynä videoteos on nähtävillä Poliittisen valokuvan festivaalilla valokuvataiteen museolla. Tämä haastattelu käydään englannin kielellä, eli tästä eteenpäin puhumme siis englantia, mutta tervetuloa kuuntelemaan. Okay, hi Demelza.
Hello.
It's really great to have the possibility to talk with you a little bit more about your work that will be part of our festival. And maybe I'll get straight to the questions because I have a lot of them, and it's really interesting to discuss your work more. At first, I would like to ask a little bit about the background of this video work, Wolves from Above. What made you be interested in wolves, especially, or wild animals? What is the story behind this?
Right, so this piece came about by accident. I didn't mean to make it. It happened. And it happened because I was making a longer form film that is still in production called Wolf Park, but then the pandemic came and blah, blah, blah. And for that piece, I have hours and hours of drone footage, amongst other things. And I was looking at that footage patiently for a long time, and then these 5.5 minutes came by, and it had a beginning, middle, and end, and events that made me think this was a standalone piece. So what is it that it contains that made me think that, in addition to having a beginning, middle, and end, the wolves look up to the drone. And when I was watching it on my computer in my room, it looked as if the wolves were looking at me. And I realized that the same would happen to the viewer in the cinema. And also there are strange moments when the wolves move in unison, and they move in geometric shapes, trapezoid shapes, circular shapes, lines, quite rigid patterns and forms that you wouldn't normally associate with a wild animal. So these ingredients, they make the wolf appear something else that we normally see in wildlife film, and they're quite tranquil. They're quite curious and interested. So I stumbled upon it, and then realized that with the right sound design, I could make this a piece where the viewer would empathize with wolves and connect to them in the way that they, I dare to say, rarely have. Yeah,
that's really interesting, and there's a lot of a lot of interesting points in different aspects in this quite short, still 5.5 minutes, as you said, piece, and it's shot with one shot. You already a little bit mentioned about this maybe stereotypical or like usual way of wildlife filming and the way that we normally see wild animals, and that this piece differs from that, and that's maybe, and that's been one of your like one of the meanings and one of the ideas in this film piece also. What does it actually mean, or how do you feel it differs from the stereotypical way that we see wild animals, and what is the stereotypical way, and how is this different from that?
We liked, this is not just something that I've noticed, but talking to the people in that particular wolf park, they are not wild wolves, they're actually in a park. But you know, with films, if you don't present a particular ingredient, then the spectator won't understand that ingredient and wouldn't take that with them in their experience of the piece. So if you don't portray a fence, then there is no fence. So they're wild. But there are other things about their behavior that might suggest that they are not wild, but that's a different discussion. I present them as wild. The wild animals in wildlife films, they are usually presented as having a strict hierarchy. They focus on action, on the kill, on the hunt. And that information is being repeated, perpetuated. In some cases, film crews even go out to look out for that. So they come to a particular place with a particular agenda, and they seek out particular behaviors that are, I mean, yes, wolves hunt and they kill and they eat, but there's more to it. So I've been reading as well, so interviewing people, talking to people and reading. And one of my main sources that I highly recommend is Of Wolves and Men by Barry Lopez. And he contextual from 1975. So it is a very old book, but it's not completely dated. We actually grapple with the same things still. And he, among many other people, highlight that the language that we use to not just describe wolves, but to then represent, also represent wolves, is usually preoccupied with hierarchy. It is quite male language, especially in those times. The people studying wolves were men, and it is almost military language. They talk about reccees, and it is very top down. But now we know a lot more. And hunting, for example, is not an activity performed by the alpha male, but is a group activity, and the female wolves play a huge part in it. Why we present it in such a way is a result of a patriarchal society, we are still dealing with that, but it is changing, obviously.
And what in this exact piece then makes it different? How do you feel? Why here we see them differently?
I think the key, or I hope so, is an empathic connection. So you don't just feel for them, but you are you're put in such a position that you empathize with them. There is a connection, hopefully, that is initially through eye contact that gives you a way into them, a way into imagining what it must be like to be a wolf, what they might hear, how they interact with each other. The sound, the piece sound is very important. So the perspective is quite detached, it's filmed with the drone, but the sound recordings are all very nearby. They're constantly very nearby. So you get a very intimate experience. You can hear licking, and you can hear sniffing, and of course you can see that as well. But the combination of them both brings you much closer to how they are. It's much more subtle as well. There's no music in it, which is often the case, when you've got an edited scene with fast-paced running and hunting and killing. There's usually sound effects that are have a heavy beat, and that's not the case here. So it requires some effort on part of the viewer, but especially at the exhibition at the Finnish Museum of Photography with the Festival of Political Photography, we have thought about the means of presentation, and it's done in such an enticing way that people will be focused, I think, and are much more encouraged to have that connection. It is displayed as not a ceiling projection, but it's a lowered screen that is on an angle. Initially, I proposed a completely horizontal, very low projection, or lowered ceiling, And the reason for that, and how it is now, is that I would like people to, I want to force people into having to adjust their human posture, which is upright and then walking around. But because you can see something when you walk around like that, but in order to really experience it, you've got to either, adjust your body a little bit, or you can lie down underneath it, because there is a softer, there's a mattress there, or a carpet. Yeah. So we are forcing the visitor to adjust their humanness, and I'm excited to see what that does. Yeah.
When you were telling about how the wolves react with each other on the film, and how they also react with the drone camera that the film has been filmed. While I was watching this, I was wondering that at the same time you see the wolves as individuals, and exactly how you told that you see how they react, and you see that they have some kind of connection with each other. But at the same time, I had the feeling that I cannot understand what they discuss, or what does it mean how they react with each other, and I see that they react, but I realize how little I actually understand of their communication. So and I was thinking about this, as you said, about the normal wild animal films that we see. There's often a voiceover telling us what do these exact wolves that we see now, what do they think, what do they do. But here we don't have that, so we kind of lose we don't know what they actually talk or discuss with each other. What do you think about this? How is it actually possible to understand in this piece? What do they communicate, or is it important to know?
I would like to hear from you. How did that make you feel, that you didn't understand? What did that do to you?
Well, of course, it made me think about different options, different possibilities. Maybe this could mean that, or maybe this one is now thinking about this one, or this one to play with that one because it comes near, or whatever. But at the same time, I think there was a really nice way to tell about this film, as maybe you said it yourself also, that it's kind of a meditation with the wolves, when you actually realize that you cannot understand, you just look at them as how they move, or you start to look at different things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really glad that it had that effect on you, because I see it as my mission to reinstall mystery and preserve mystery. I think it is dangerous to try to explain, because we have a tendency to get lost in explanations and then take it for granted, and then use that information when we go back into daily life, and then try to fit it what we already know. But there's so many possibilities, and I think we should keep them open. We shouldn't become rigid and reified, and get stuck in a particular, perhaps linguistic circle. So not just with this film, but actually my film Wolf Park shows the fence in the Wolf Park, and that becomes a symbol for perhaps exactly that we need boundaries sometimes to be able to consciously observe and talk about something, to come up with language in order to share how we think about something. But then that shouldn't become a closed off system. It should remain flexible. So I'm deliberately making things mysterious and inexplicable. So I'm very happy that it had this effect on you, because that is what it's meant to do.
Well, that's interesting to hear. And this is actually a question that we've been discussing a lot in the context of our festival also, because at the same time we try to reach some kind of, we try to explain or we try to show how the animals see this world, or how the humans and the animals, what kind of connections we have. But at the same time, we realize that actually we cannot know, we are not animals, we are not this piece of species of animals. We cannot actually know how they see the world, although we can try maybe through this kind of different kind of, for example, art projects. And
but we can relate to them. It doesn't mean that because we cannot be a different species, it doesn't mean that we cannot relate. And I think I hope that with this piece, and perhaps other films as well, I'm offering a way to show how we can relate, despite differences in our consciousness and in the way that we are in our worlds and our shared world, obviously.
And how we can relate and maybe emphasize. And this idea of empathy is this is also something that is a part of different works during the festival, and that's a really interesting question when we discuss about the relations of human beings and animals, that can we emphasize, and how, and what does it would it make a difference if we could emphasize with animals better, and is maybe some art, or what do you think, can art or film be helpful? Can it does it
Absolutely.
have a role?
Absolutely, yeah, I think it's very important. It offers the tools with which, the thing with a frame is that you can show something particular, so you can direct the eye, you can somewhat direct thoughts, so you can definitely teach something. You can show an example of a way of seeing that people then hopefully can use in daily life as well. The same for writing, and the same for painting. And I think empathy, learning how to empathize, is incredibly important for learning to coexist and interrelate, because we tend to put ourselves on a pedestal. We're still very anthropocentric, even in our attempts to be to interrelate, which is understandable, but we should be very careful with it. We're not better, and we need everything around us.
Yes, interesting. And what I mean, I could comment that this topic of wolves is really interesting in Finland, especially, and maybe. Well, I would like to ask you about that. Is it so in Scotland or Netherlands also? But in Finland, wolf is an animal that provokes a lot of different emotions, and somehow maybe a lot more than other wild animals that we have, and a lot of fear and hatred, and that's some and unrational fear also. And that's of course cultural thing partly, but I would like to ask about, what do you feel, is it so in Scotland also? Have you also met this kind of fear and this kind of reaction towards?
Well, there are no wild wolves in Scotland, not anymore. They've all been extinguished. Brutally murdered. I should also say I'm not a biologist, and I don't have answers. I do have observations from reading and talking to people, interviewing people. But especially with wolves, there's such a huge literary history and oral history, and all those stories are about fear and about negative characterization of that animal. And yet again, here we go with the linguistics. We use that information to guide our present day interactions. And with Wolf Park, it's very interesting. The reason why I interviewed the tourists there is because they take those fairy tale stories and but also news reports. I mean, wolves do kill, but they take that and then they meet the wolves in that park and they meet a very different animal, and the information that they had prior to meeting them doesn't match with what they're seeing there. And rather than changing their idea about what wolves are or who wolves are, they're saying those wolves in the park aren't real wolves. They can't accept it. But it's a very different discussion. And I think one of the problems that we have is that we treat wolves as one of the same uniform organism. But I think that wolves are as different as people. There are families of wolves, there are clans of wolves. Wolves in one area might not have the same character traits or have slight differences from other wolves. So I think one of the dangers is that we're treating as the same, and they're not. They are families. This is not something I make up. One of the most renowned biologists who has spent his entire life researching wolves is David Meach. Mm-hmm. And so Meach is M-E-C-H. And he actually says, and he also says, comparing wolves in captivity to wild wolves is like saying people in a refugee camp are the same as people outside of a refugee camp. So but coming back to the issue, so it is actually very complicated. Yes, they kill. So, but they don't. If you were to walk, I don't know, in Canada or probably in the same anywhere where the wolves are, you won't see wolves because they walk away from you. When they're really hungry and you live in a village close to where wolves are and it is winter and it's freezing, then they're hungry. So, and if you have a dog that lives outside your house or stock, then that's a really easy meal. So yes, then they will kill. Or any animal, deer or whatever. So that's completely understandable. This is perhaps sidetracking a little bit. Barry Lopez presents a super interesting concept in his book, Wolves and Men, which he calls the conversation of death, because it's a mystery, or it's still a mystery why wolves hunt so much but kill very little, and like lots of hunts do not result in a kill. It is abruptly ended sometimes. Some people think it's because whilst hunting, they try out the animal to see if it is healthy enough to be eaten, because who wants to eat something that is diseased, and they can sense that. The conversation of death is this moment when the wolf decides or questions the prey whether or not it can be eaten, and he offers, this is not hard science, it's a thought, but that's a lovely thought, that the reason why sheep, for example, are killed in such great numbers but not eaten is because it is a domesticated animal and it has unlearned to have the conversation of death with wolves. So the wolf chases the sheep responds in a way that is very strange. It shouldn't behave like that, and that confuses the wolf, and therefore it performs strange behavior as well. It's a thought, but it's lovely. I like it very much.
That's really interesting, and yes, I understand that it's the wolf issue in different countries. It's a different topic in a way, but at the same time, this film really provokes the ideas about this, because this is something you hear all the time, and especially in Finland, that's quite often we hear the fear of wolves. And why I said irrational, I think because there's a lot of fear of wolves killing kids or something like this that really happened last time in Finland more than 100 year ago. But
Yeah.
cars kill kids. I mean, a lot more often, but we are not afraid of cars, or most of us are not. So there's also something else in this wolf, and
Definitely. Killings are often exaggerated. Again, that's also in the book. Also historical killings.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why it makes the film really accurate, although it can be about a lot of different things. What I would still like to ask, because it's really interesting to hear a little bit of this making of the film physically. So you have been spending time in this wolf park. What kind of place is it, and how have you been filming them, with drones or also filming them with cameras, or what's your method of working with?
Right. So this is a good moment to give kudos to the people at the park. So it's a wolf park in Quebec, in a town called Girardville, and it's part of Park Mahican.
Okay.
And thanks for them to let me stay there and film the wolves. So in that park, they've got 3 enclosures, and in the furthest enclosure, there's wolves that you won't really see if you're there, because they walk away from you if you walk around. Maybe you'll see a few, but not really. And then there's those are gray wolves, and then there's an enclosure with Arctic wolves that are a little bit more inquisitive and used to visitors and will look at you. Beautiful moments happen there. And then there's the first enclosure as you come in, and that is the enclosure that you can enter. You can go inside and spend time face to face, literally face to face. They lick your face with wolves, and that's wolves. They do a lot with nose to nose contact, and they lick each other's nose, and so you kind of have to let them do that, because that's their language, that's their way of getting to know you and saying hello. And we have filmed there from the ground and from the air. The reason why I wanted to film from the air is to quite literally offer a different perspective on wolves, but also because I thought I saw the lines and patterns in the grass, and I thought that if you would film that from above, you get a really nice play with geometric shapes. And I then spoke to the cinematographer, the drone operator for a long while, Joris Cotin, and spoke a lot about geometry, and how geometry reminds us more of industry, of human constructions, of human presence, more so than wildness, which we associate with chaos.
Yeah.
So I said to him that I wanted to wait for particular shapes and patterns in their behavior, in the grass, that presented them as something different, in addition to the literally different perspective, which makes them, if it's from really far, look like little worms, maggots, perhaps even, or chromosomes, or they look very different. So we filmed a lot, waiting for those ingredients to collide, and the eye contact. And I also told him not to reframe, but to stay still, because drone footage is usually always used as a flyover. It's always moving. So I wanted to find a drone language that hasn't been used yet. So I wanted a perfectly still image. But then he had listened to my endless talking about geometry. And so in the piece, he reframes to a better composition. In the end, I'm glad he did, because then with the sound designer, Lars Koens, we emphasized those instances. So that's how it came about. Yeah. Oh, and a drone is really noisy. So
Yeah.
the sounds that you hear are not recorded at the same time as the image. You can't. So after filming, I went there with my sound recording equipment and then recorded it really close by the gates. And there's also some Foley in the studio done by Lars. Yeah.
It's interesting how the drone and the presence of camera is somehow there all the time, although it's something that we really rarely see wolves from this perspective, but maybe that's because of the eye contact, and you kind of feel that, okay, they look at the camera, and then am I right that there's also some constructed sound of the drone movements when the drone kind of turns, you hear so you kind of remember that, oh yeah, this is a drone up in the air and filming the wolves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. Yeah. I've always often wondered how the wolves perceive this drone. I was really worried to fly the drone up. I thought it might upset them, but they're relatively used to the sound of machinery because when they get fed, a truck drives in and they actually respond to that. They come to the gates when they hear that. So I thought I was upsetting them, but not at all. Since smell is so important to them, I wonder if they look up to try and smell it, but they can't, or maybe it has a very faint smell of human. But I've often wondered how they relate to this drone. What they find way more, well, I want to use the word scary, but I'm not sure if that's the right word, at least it makes them jump away, is the Steadicam. So that's a camera on a gimbal. So when we use that, and they kind of go like, well, that's a bit odd. But the drone, I couldn't make this film anymore because now they're so used to the drone, they don't look up anymore. They just go about, do their daily business. Yeah.
Well, we're really happy to see you in the festival, and thank you really much for the interview.